Well, this is kind of odd. Someone asked me why I write my blog, and they asked me not to write a blog about how I write my blog. They wanted me to answer in a video. So this is why. But I need to read this quote from Noam Chomsky. Here's what he says. The smart way to keep people passive and obedient is to strictly limit the spectrum of acceptable opinion, but allow very lively debate within that spectrum. Even encourage the more critical and dissident views. That gives people the sense that there's free thinking going on, while all the time presuppositions of the system are being reinforced by the limits put on the range of the debate. Well, my experience in treating addiction pretty much mirrors Chomsky's comments, especially in academics, and everything stems from academics. So let's say you wanted to study addiction. You either have to fund the study yourself or you have to get a grant. So you apply for a grant. The granting agency will have set up a system of referees. Those are people who are experts in the field. What's an expert? An expert is a person who's excelled for a long time at the debate within those limits that Chomsky talks about. And they've excelled at staying in those limits and not rocking the boat. So if you go rocking the boat in your grant description or your grant request, you don't get a grant. And it all stops there. So let's assume you've got your own money and you're rich and you do your own study. And so now you want to write a paper on your data. Well, the journal's going to have also a referee committee made up of those same experts. People who have many, many peer-reviewed articles to their name. And here you come with new data and a new idea that's outside the acceptable limits of the debate, and it rocks the boat. It makes their 30 years of papers look like a mistake. It makes people wonder, how many people have I killed doing it my way? And they look at that and they say, this is unpublishable. While my career started in academics, it's been a long time since I understood that no real progress in treating addiction was going to be made on that front. I mean, we could argue about a lot of things, but we couldn't argue about the essential nature of addiction, what it was, what the core was, what caused it. That was all already written down, not arguable. Drugs cause addiction, period. The first use is voluntary, period. Each drug is different, period. There's no argument about that. And in academics and government, which gets its heavy hitters from academics, and industry, which looks to academics for its credentials and its credibility, you can't wander across this line. These are the assumptions. And there's a whole lot more that I haven't mentioned than those 3 or 4, whatever I said. The bottom line is we've been at this for 100 years and we've made no headway. Those assumptions we have, those immutable facts, they form the limits of the debate. They've led us to a worse situation than we had 100 years ago. And we never question them, we never look at them, we never check ourselves. What if addiction isn't caused by drugs? What if a certain part of the population just has addiction because of genetics? And what if another part of the population, genetically born without addiction, gets addiction from how and where they live? Now, how are we going to prevent it then? Well, first, making drugs illegal isn't going to help. It'll actually hurt because it will drive underground and suppress the very data we need to follow in order to see how our other efforts are working. So what are those other efforts going to be? Well, we're going to need really good, cheap treatment. By cheap, I don't mean low quality, I mean inexpensive. And really good treatment that is fast and doable on a very, very broad scale, because up to 20% of our population has addiction. That's Could be 60 million people in this country if you look at addiction as a brain disease and not as a drug-based syndrome. Genetically, we would want to screen people. And if they have the genetics that can lead to addiction biology, we're going to want to intervene quickly and treat them to normalize brain function so that they don't get addiction. And what about those people born normal, but because of the social situation and the place they live and the way they live, they get addiction biology? Well, as we as a society are going to have to look at how we treat people and how we handle people in those situations. We're never going to do that until we understand the cost of our current behavior, which we can't understand until we look at addiction as the disease it is in nature and not the thing we made up and wrote down in 1981 in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. What keeps this change from happening? Well, there's a lot of money in the status quo. Imagine what your police department's budget would look like if all of a sudden drugs were legal and they weren't a problem. What about all those treatment centers? What are we going to do with all those buildings and all those people who do the treatment in those treatment centers? And what about all those academics? Once the problem's solved, they don't need to talk about it anymore. And academics love to talk about a problem. Very little on the solvable part of the problem, but they love to talk about it. There are literally hundreds of thousands of people who aren't going to have jobs in the field they have them now when we fix addiction as a problem in American life. I'm not saying it's a conspiracy. It isn't, but it's a confluence of needs. It keeps the limits on the debate because people just can't go past it. And when we get past it, people act unconsciously to bring us back to the limits. I mean, how many people have actually gone back and read what it was like 100 years ago to see that things aren't any better now than they were? And that's just not average behavior. And so we keep listening to, we've almost got it, we've almost understand it. It's a really complex thing, this addiction, because they keep coming up with new drugs and new addictions, and we thought we had it licked, and then they came up with this other stuff, and it's not our fault, and we're doing a good job, but it's really, really hard to understand, and the brain is so complex, and the disease is so complex, and there's dual diagnoses, and co-occurring disorders, and whole many other things, and then there's interacting addictions, and they meld together and make things so complex. And we listen to those excuses and we say, okay, we'll give you some more money. We'll give you another few years. And we keep going and going and going, and we never stop. We never look back and say, wait, you told me that 20 years ago. It's kind of like nuclear fusion. My entire life, nuclear fusion's been 20 years away. It's still 20 years away. At some point, we got to read history. At some point, we got to wake up and say, wait, something's fundamentally wrong with what we're doing. This isn't a problem of dumb scientists. It's not a problem of bad data. It's a problem of assumptions. So that's why I write. Because I've tried talking to government. I've tried talking to big business. I've tried talking to academics. I've tried talking to insurance companies. That doesn't work. What works is you. What works is regular people hearing questions they've never heard before, asking questions they've never heard before, thinking things they've never heard before, and wondering, what if? But there's a caveat. It won't be advice from within the boundaries of the acceptable debate, because those boundaries are what's keeping us sick as a nation.